In the quiet shadows of history, some lives shine not because they sought greatness, but because transformation found them. One such life belonged to a man named Saul, later known as Paul. His name echoes through cathedrals, letters, and memories, not because he ruled empires, but because he gave up everything for a message. A message that began in conflict and ended in peace. This is the story of St. Paul, a man who began by fighting the very faith he would later die for. In a world ruled by Rome and shaped by Jewish tradition, one man's journey from Tarsus to Damascus, from prison to freedom, would reshape the soul of a new religion. But before he was a saint, he was Saul, devout, learned, determined, and dangerous. Tonight we will travel with him, not in haste, but gently, as he walks the long road, from persecution to peace, from Saul to Paul. Let us begin in the quiet city of Tarsus. The story of Paul begins far from Jerusalem, in a small but thriving city called Tarsus. Located in what is now southern Turkey, ancient Tarsus was nestled along the Cydnus River, its waters cool and slow, winding past stone houses and shaded courtyards. Tarsus was more than a provincial town. It was a center of learning, philosophy, and trade, a place where Roman banners flew, but Greek ideas flourished. Saul, as he was then known, was born into a devout Jewish family. His tribe was Benjamin, one of the ancient 12 of Israel. His lineage was proud, his upbringing strict. But Saul was no ordinary Jew. He held Roman citizenship, a rare privilege. It granted him legal protections, the ability to travel freely, and eventually the right to appeal to Caesar himself. In his childhood, the streets of Tarsus would have echoed with the sounds of debate, Stoics discussing virtue, merchants bartering spices, and rabbis teaching Torah in whispered tones. Saul grew up fluent in both Hebrew and Greek. His mind was sharp, analytical, and hungry for truth. He was sent to Jerusalem to study under Gamaliel, one of the most respected rabbis of the age. There, he immersed himself in the law, not just learning it, but living it. The Pharisaic tradition he followed was rigorous, deeply devoted to purity, ritual, and obedience. From the outside, he was a model of discipline. Inside, a fire burned, a zeal to protect what he saw as the one true way of worship. But the world around him was changing. A carpenter from Nazareth had begun to gather followers, teaching love over law, mercy over sacrifice. And even though that carpenter was crucified, his name, Jesus, continued to echo. To Saul, it was not hope, it was heresy. And so a quiet fury grew. In Jerusalem, Saul walked the narrow streets with confidence. His garments were clean, his speech precise, his beliefs unshakable. He wasn't just a student of the law, he was its defender. In the courts of the temple, where incense rose and sandals echoed on cool marble, Saul studied alongside the best. He listened to elders speak of Moses and the prophets. He memorized commandments, judged disputes, and obeyed the traditions of his fathers. He believed that the law, the Torah, was not just sacred, but complete, perfect, final. And so, when whispers began to rise about a man named Jesus, crucified yet still followed, Saul's concern grew. They called themselves followers of the way. They spoke of love over law, of resurrection, forgiveness, and grace. To Saul, this was not simply wrong. It was dangerous, a threat to purity, a challenge to centuries of obedience. And he would not stand by. In the cool halls of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, Saul found himself supported by elders who also feared this growing sect. The followers of Jesus, once a small group, were multiplying. They gathered in homes, sang hymns in public, and spoke boldly in synagogues. And worse, they claimed that this Jesus was the Messiah. Saul saw only blasphemy. To protect his people, he believed, he must stop them. His mission became clear: to silence this way, to find its leaders, to break apart its gatherings, one by one. He secured letters from the high priest, giving him authority to arrest believers in Damascus, a city over 200 kilometers away. He would travel there personally, breathing threats and dragging back any who claimed the name of Christ. He did not doubt. He did not hesitate. In his mind, he was doing God's work. But on that long desert road, beneath the heat of the Syrian sun, Saul's journey would take an unexpected turn. A moment would come that would shake his body, still his voice, and blind his eyes. And in that silence, everything would begin again. Before Saul became a messenger of peace, he was a man of fury. In Jerusalem, he witnessed the early Christians with growing alarm. They were bold, unafraid, speaking of a risen Christ, sharing their goods, praying in public. And then came Stephen, a young man, chosen as one of the first deacons, full of faith, full of words that challenged the Sanhedrin. Stephen stood in the temple unshaken and proclaimed that Jesus was the true fulfillment of the law. The crowd turned angry. The elders tore their robes, and outside the city walls they picked up stones. Saul stood by and watched. He held the garments of those who threw the stones. He did not lift a hand, but he gave his approval. The stones struck Stephen, and with his final breath he spoke a strange forgiveness. Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Saul did not weep. That moment lit a fire. Saul now moved from town to town, searching out followers of the way. He entered homes, pulled men and women into the streets, and brought them in chains to judgment. His name became feared, and when he learned that the message had spread to Damascus, a city far to the north, he prepared to strike. He took letters of authority from the high priest, and with companions beside him, set out on foot. The desert road awaited. The journey to Damascus is long. The sun bears down hard. The road is dusty and lined with stone, but Saul's purpose burned brighter than the sun. Then, as he neared the city, in the midday heat, something happened. A light, brighter than lightning, surrounded him. He fell to the ground. Those with him froze in terror. And then, a voice, calm and clear. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Trembling, he answered, Who are you, Lord? The reply came, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. And then, silence. When Saul opened his eyes, he saw nothing, blind. His companions took him by the hand and led him into the city. For 3 days, he neither ate nor drank nor saw. Alone, he waited in a house on Straight Street, no longer confident, no longer proud, just quiet. Then came a man named Ananias, a follower of the very Jesus Saul had hated. Ananias had been told in a vision to go to Saul, and so he entered gently and spoke, Brother Saul, the Lord has sent me, so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And at once something like scales fell from Saul's eyes. He could see. He rose and was baptized. The persecutors had become the penitent. Saul remained in Damascus for some time, but the man who once came to destroy now preached in the synagogues. He declared that Jesus truly was the Son of God. Confusion followed him. Some feared a trick, others watched in awe. But the change in him was real. His voice had softened, his eyes held peace. Soon threats arose against him from those who once called him friend, and under cover of night, Saul was lowered in a basket through a city wall and fled. For a time, he disappeared. He traveled to Arabia, a quiet, unknown season of retreat, a time for prayer, reflection, unlearning and relearning. Years later, he returned to Jerusalem. The believers there still feared him, but a man named Barnabas came forward and stood beside him. The church began to believe in Saul, now called Paul, a Latin version of his name. A new chapter had begun. Paul set out, not as a soldier, but as a traveler of peace. His journeys would cover over 10,000 miles, from Antioch to Cyprus, from Galatia to Philippi, from Corinth to Ephesus. Paul walked, sailed, wrote, and preached. He spoke in synagogues, marketplaces, and by riversides. He met Lydia, a seller of purple cloth. He argued with philosophers in Athens. He healed the sick, cast out spirits, and was stoned in Lystra. But always, he rose again. His message was simple, that salvation came not through law, but through faith, that Jesus was alive, and that in him all were welcome, Jew and Gentile alike. With each journey, the danger grew. Paul faced riots, imprisonment, betrayal. But his letters, his words, spread far beyond his reach. Paul's letters, or epistles, became the foundation of Christian theology. He wrote to churches he had visited, and those he hadn't. To the Romans, he wrote of grace. to the Corinthians of unity, to the Galatians of freedom. His words were passionate, yet controlled, stern, yet full of compassion. I have been crucified with Christ, he wrote, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. His writings form nearly 1/3 of the New Testament. Even in chains, his words traveled freely. Paul returned to Jerusalem, but his enemies were waiting. Accused of bringing Gentiles into the temple, he was seized by a mob. Roman soldiers intervened and arrested him. For 2 years, Paul remained imprisoned, first in Caesarea, then transferred to Rome. He stood trial before governors and even appealed to Caesar himself. A storm struck his ship on the way to Italy, but even shipwreck could not stop him. In Rome, Paul lived under house arrest. He could not roam, but he could receive guests, and he continued to write. He wrote of hope, of endurance, of running the race with perseverance. He was now an old man, and he knew his time was short. Tradition holds that Paul was executed under the reign of Nero, beheaded as was the right of a Roman citizen. He died not with a sword in his hand, but with faith in his heart. And today, the Basilica of St. Paul, outside the walls, marks the place of his rest. His legacy is not in monuments, but in minds and hearts, in the letters still read, and the faith still spread. Saul began with anger, but Paul ended with peace. His life was not easy. He was beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and finally killed. But in the end, he said, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. May his journey from Saul to Paul remind us that no one is beyond change, that even the hardest hearts can become instruments of grace